As the plane pulled up into the air, I looked at him and I tried to remember every detail about him. In his eyes, I saw confusion. I saw love, and I thought my heart was going to break right there in that moment. Welcome to Extraordinary Stories Podcast, Short Stories, Episode 1. Hey, how are you? Are you well? Are you good? I am. Okay, so what are we doing here? What is this? Well, this is the new midweek episode that I'm going to be putting out. It's Extraordinary Stories Podcast, Short Stories. And where this comes from is I now, and I ask for this, and I cannot be any more grateful for this, but so many people send me so many stories all the time, and I couldn't possibly contain them all in the main episodes. So this is going to be a midweek episode that you're going to get that's largely made up of the stories that people send me. Stories that when you send to me, I think, yeah, okay, I connect with that, and that's something I'd like to share back with people. So I get them in droves and I love it. So please, please keep sending me those stories. It will be a shorter episode. Sometimes it'll just be one little story. But it's just a way for me to have a wee cheeky hello and drop into your podcasts in the midweek. Okay, so shall we begin? Okay, let's go. In 1969, two young travellers from Australia arrive in London. It was November when Anthony Burke and John Randall decide, hey, we're in London, let's hit up all the usual sightseeing places. So they go to the Tower of London, London Bridge, Buckingham Palace, etc, etc. And then they think, okay, let's go to Harrods, the world famous department store. So they're wandering around the expensive clothing, the accessories, the homewares, all that jazz. They reach the second floor, and what do they find? Well, they find a zoo. Yeah, a zoo. I'm actually not even kidding. A zoo on the second floor of Harrods. I mean, this was 1969, so obviously all sorts of malarkey was allowed to go on. So, in amongst all of the animals that were part of this zoo on the second floor of the shop, they see a cage in the corner. And in that cage, there are two tiny lion cubs, a male and a female. They said from that first memory of being there in that zoo that the female had snarled at them in a really kind of alarming way, but that the male, her brother, had pretended not to see anybody, was just pretending that the shoppers didn't exist. So they stood and they watched these two lion cubs, and they began to fall in love with the male cub instantly. And then they started to get an idea. Could they possibly offer this male cub a different life? Could they get him out of this shop, out of this cage? The male cub was on sale for 250 guineas. I mean, old money alert here. So I think what I read is that this roughly estimates to about £3,500 to £4,000 in today's money. So Harrods staff, they were holding interviews with prospective owners for any of the animals that they were selling. And I mean, I find this odd. A lot of people wanted a lion. There was a lot of interest in getting a lion cub. I mean, I'm saying these words out loud and I can hear in my head how crazy that sounds. So these two guys, Anthony and John, they went home. They got dressed into their poshest, swankiest clothing, and they went back to Harrods. By this time, they had definitely decided they wanted this male lion cub. So the two of them live on the King's Road in London, which is in Chelsea. I mean, now the King's Road is quite a posh bit of London to live in. And I'm sure at the time it would still have been quite a swanky bit to live in. They live above a furniture shop and they both work in the furniture shop. So they have their interview to potentially own a lion cub, and they go home awaiting the news from Harrods. Now, Christian, who is the lion cub, as they will come to know, Christian had become a little bit mischievous in Harrods, and the shop were kind of ready to get him off of their hands. John says, "We got the call. They told us Christian was ours. We went in, we paid the money, we collected Christian, and the next day we walked him out through the staff exit on a lead. They put Christian in their car and they drove home. It didn't really take very long. Christian settled very quickly into his lifestyle with these two men. At this point, I think Christian is only about 4 months old. So time passes, and he's now 8 months old. He's 60 pounds, and he's about 4 feet long. Anthony says he loved being carried and cuddled. His paws would reach around our necks, and his tongue would lick our faces. He had a soft, tawny coloured fur. But, as Anthony says, it was his beautiful, round, rust-coloured eyes that dominated his appearance. He was a delight. He had a placid nature. He was house-trained. He used a giant, lion-sized kitty litter tray. Love to see the size of that. So the two men, I mean, they lived quite normally with Christian, the lion. He would pad about the shop that they worked in downstairs, quite happy, quite well-natured. And people would come to see Christian the lion. The story had travelled. People couldn't believe a lion was walking around a shop and a flat in London. As you imagine, the two guys, they had a very complex diet for Christian, making sure he got the food he needed and all of the vitamins. They cared for him really, really well. Sometimes they would bring an unskinned rabbit into the house for his dinner. Well, I guess if a lion is your pet, you're going to have to do things like that. John says of this time period, he was inexhaustible. Waste paper baskets were his favourite. First, he wore them in his head. Then he ripped them apart. We had to buy him really hardy toys. He looked forward each morning to the arrival of Kay, the cleaner, because Christian was certain that she had been provided for his entertainment. This really made me laugh. When Kay the cleaner would come in to their flat, Christian the lion would sit on the vacuum cleaner while she hoovered. I just love that. So she's like trying to hoover and he's like sitting on it. Christian spent a great deal of time climbing up into the laps of his two owners, curling up and falling asleep. Again, I mean, this is great. Anthony says, sometimes he would be hiding behind furniture in the shop. He would charge and leap at us. But we developed the habit of glancing always over our shoulders. If we caught him frozen in a crouched position with intent and mischief in his eyes, he would nonchalantly pretend to clean his paws, annoyed that his fun had been spoiled. For the game was usually to stalk and catch them unaware. Usually they could always predict from Christian what his intentions were from what was going on in his eyes. But it's playful, it's fun. In terms of exercising Christian, the local vicar allowed them to use the church gardens to walk Christian. Christian had really become something of a star. He was a real local attraction by this point. People would go out their way to come to the shop and visit the lion, just to pat him or just to play with him. There's so many images of these guys driving around London in their soft top car with Christian hanging at the back of it, or them at like a party and they've got Christian on a lead. Yeah, so he's really becoming famous. He starts actually to do modelling shoots and make TV appearances. Anthony and John, they get invited onto radio programmes to talk about what is life like living with a lion cub. But Christian was growing up fast and he no longer looked like a cub. He was very much becoming an adult male lion. And this is not surprising, but along with the sort of growth in size that Christian was having, he also realised that he could intimidate people and he could cause fear. He would pounce at people and, without ever attacking them, he just knew that he had the power to intimidate and cause a little bit of fear. And it did start to cause fear in people. People stopped coming into the shop so much as Christian got bigger, because actually coming up to a furniture shop, if you're there, you're looking for a chair, if you see an actual real lion sitting in the window, maybe you would have second thoughts. Maybe you just wouldn't be so eager to step into that shop. Others who'd known Christian from a puppy, they'll say they were never afraid of him. They just saw the fun in his eyes. He was just daft and liked a lot of fun. And I think that's easy to say. It's like one of those things like, I'm a dog lover. I love Dobermans and I love pit bulls. But if it's a Doberman or a pit bull that I've never seen before, on sight, they do kind of give me just a little moment of anxiety, a little moment of fear. My boss had a Doberman who lived till she was 15 years old. She was just the most beautiful dog in the world. But when I very first met her, she was just this huge, big thing that came bounding towards me. And I kind of shit myself a wee bit. I was like, whoa, this dog is massive. Loveliest dog in the world. But actually, yeah, if you don't know that about them, on sight, they can be a little bit scary. So Christian the lion's been living with Anthony and John for a while now, and in 1970, they say Christian is getting bored. He was rapidly outgrowing the life that he was in. He was irritated, for example, that he'd outgrown his favourite sitting spot on the stairs. There's a sort of telling turn in the story here from Anthony, he says, once and once only were we ever frightened of Christian. He had found a fur belt that had fallen off of a coat, and in his excitement he ran down to the basement of the shop with it. So the two guys followed him to retrieve it. John says he was chewing the belt and he was making really excited chewing sounds. But then he says this: we tried to take it from him, but he flattened his ears and snarled a ferocious warning at us. He was an unrecognisable wild animal. He would have attacked us if we tried to take that belt away. So we slowly moved away from him. After about 5 minutes, his excitement over the belt and his anger subsided. So what now does the future hold for Christian and his two owners? The two men agree that sending him to a zoo is not what they want. They said they feel like they would be betraying Christian at this point. So the men start discussing with friends, what are they going to do? Now it's a bit of a complicated route here, but there's like a friend of a friend of a friend who knows a person who works in Africa with animals, and they gently suggest perhaps Christian needs to be taken out of London and taken to Africa. I mean, the guys are devastated that they even have to consider it. Although I pause here and I think, what did you expect was going to happen? Did you think you were going to have a fully grown adult male lion living in your house all your life? But the other side of me says you loved him since the minute you saw him in Harrods when he was a cub. You don't want to let him go. I get that. The main worry really for the guys was actually that Christian, who had led up to this point such a kind of unnatural lion life, would be so domesticated that actually rehabilitation would be impossible. But having talked to many, many people about it, they were assured that Christian was still young enough to adapt. If they were to take him to Africa, put him in the wild, he would adapt. In the summer of 1970, Christian left the King's Road flat and London forever. Anthony and John packed up all of Christian's belongings. They gave him mild tranquilizers. They gave him meat. And they went on a 15-hour journey, transporting him to Nairobi. They had quite the journey ahead of them here. It wasn't even finished at Nairobi. They had a further 200 miles when they got there onto Kenya. Christian was sleepy and disorientated for most of the journey. So when they got to where Christian was going to be living, it was time to say their goodbyes. Now the man who'd organised Christian to be there said, don't worry, he will just join the pride of lions that's here, no problem. There'll be a bit of adjustment. There'll be, all the dominant stuff that always happens when a new animal member joins. But I promise you, he will adjust quickly. John says lots of tears were shed. Leaving him behind was incredibly hard. But we had to let him live where he belonged. Anthony and John, they head back to London. They get regular updates on Christian. But they were anxious, really anxious, to know that he was actually okay. It's alright to get a phone call from Africa saying, yeah, he's fine. They need to know for themselves that Christian is actually okay. A year after leaving him in Africa, the two men return. They made that journey because they just needed to see Christian. Now, what I'm about to describe is out there for everyone to see, and I urge you to watch it. In fact, I'll put it up. It will break your heart, unless you have a heart of stone. I hope you don't. Anthony and John arrive to where Christian is living, amongst other lions, and they stand at the bottom of a series of really large rocks. Christian, now a huge male lion, comes slowly down the rocks and he stops. He looks at them. The two men have a look of pure joy in their eyes. But Christian has just stopped. And what's he going to do? Well, slowly, one paw after another, he starts to move towards them. And then from nowhere, he runs at them and he jumps at both men. And for a beautiful period of time, Anthony, John and Christian, they're just tangled together. Christian is so happy to see them. He can't stop jumping at them and they can't stop touching him. It's just absolutely gorgeous. I'll put it up. You'll see this footage. It's really just incredible. You see a real moment here where animal and human emotion meet perfectly in this moment. So Anthony and John, they spend the next few days with Christian. They lay with him in the shade. They walk where he walks. They eat when he eats. Now, they can't stay forever, so they have to go. They leave, they get home, and they're missing him terribly. So, what do? They save their money. And they went back the following year to see him again. This one wasn't filmed. By now, Christian has a lioness wife. Lioness wife? I don't know if that's the right... Is it? I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but anyway. Well, he has a wife and cubs. And here's the oddity in the story. I kind of just love this so much. Christian hasn't been seen for 3 months. No one knows where he is. When Anthony and John appear for their second visit, Christian appears out of nowhere. I love that. I love that so much. He just hadn't been seen. And the minute they land where he's living, this lion just suddenly appears, having not been seen. They spend 9 beautiful days with Christian. He goes where they go. They spend all their time together. But again, the time comes and it's time to say goodbye. They get into their small plane and they say their final ever goodbyes to Christian. And John describes that as the plane flew away, Christian just stared up and he watched them until they were out of sight. And that was the last time they would ever see him. 2 years later, Christian crossed the Tana River, heading away from where he'd been living, and he was never seen again. For the next few years, Anthony and John, they waited impatiently for news of him, but it never came. John says, "We waited for any news. We like to imagine that he had established a territory and a pride of his own along the way. We hoped that he lived for another 10 years and that his descendants are hunting in Kenya today. The questions of where did Christian go? What happened to him? They still go unanswered today. And so ends the story of Christian the lion. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed the first Extraordinary Stories podcast, Short Stories episode. Please send me your stories. This is what will drive this midweek episode. If you want to get me, I'm on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and Patreon. Thank you for your ears. Thank you for listening. Okay, goodbye.
It didn't affect me really one way or the other. I would imagine from the look on his face, let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over. Let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over.